The One Piece card game has a lot of leaders. From the fast aggro leaders to the slow control leaders, one often neglected skill is applicable to all of them. When starting a game, each player draws 5 cards for their starting hand. You have one opportunity to return all of the cards in your hand, reshuffle, and redraw 5 entirely new cards. This seemingly binary decision gains depth through the very simplicity that defines it. Welcome to the One Piece TCG 101 guide on mulliganing. Hey guys, iKailaKai here, and it's been a while since we talked about some fundamentals. In many card games, you get the opportunity at the start of the game to redraw some of the cards in your hand. As you're not afforded this luxury in the One Piece card game, a lot of people assume that this is just a very simple 1 or 0 decision, but there's so many factors that go into this decision. Even if you've been playing the One Piece card game for a while, there may be some fundamental mistakes that you've been making in regard to the mulligan. As such, even if you are an intermediate player, I hope that you can learn something from this video. And if not, maybe share it with someone who would benefit from it. I make a variety of videos, whether it's my Blue Purple Luffy guide on Metafy, my fundamentals videos, gameplay videos, or meta-analysis videos, so if you are interested in that, make sure to consider subscribing. It really helps me out a lot, and I greatly appreciate it. If we can make it to 20,000 by the end of August, then I'll also I'll do the ASMR video that some of you guys have been asking for. Yikes. Now, in the One Piece card game, what are you really looking for in your starting hand? There are many small factors that go into this decision, and in this video, we're going to be talking over quite a few of them. The first and one of the most important and simple to understand concepts is the curve. In the One Piece card game, you get 2 mana or dong every single turn. The player going first starts with 1 dong, and the player going second starts with 2 dong. What this means is that the curve is actually different from when you're going first or second. The player going first's curve is going to go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then 10, the maximum dong. And the player going second is going to go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. There are some decks that do not abide by these rules, particularly purple decks that have the ability to reduce or increase the amount of maximum dong that they have on their field in the early game. But for the start of this video, let's talk about these more simple decks that do play on curve, as we would say. By using the maximum amount of dong that's available to you on any given turn to play the largest character that you can to board, you're generally making your board as powerful as possible for that time frame. In a situation like this where we have a 3, 5, and 7 cost in our starting hand, then it feels really good to hold on to this hand as we can use all of our dong efficiently every single turn. If conversely though we had this exact same starting hand and we were going second, then we would have 1 dong left over every single turn, not really playing to the advantage of going second. As such, maybe if you run many cards that have 4 or 6 costs in your deck, then you would choose to mulligan your hand if you're going second to try and find those cards. Next, let's talk about key cards. Sometimes when you're fighting a deck, it doesn't come down to whether you can play on curve or not, it comes down to whether you can find your key card. Your key card may vary from matchup to matchup, but this key card is going to be a card that will heavily favor you over the long course of the game if you can play multiple or if you can play the card on time. For the first half of this video, I'll be talking about these concepts through an actual deck, Yellow NL. Yellow NL is a deck that's relatively simple to pick up, but quite strong once you get the hang of him. As such, I think that it's a very solid pick for beginners to the game. Knowing what your keycard exactly is for the matchup is going to take a lot of practice, but for the sake of Yellow NL, he really wants to get into the late game and get to a point where he has a very large board with large characters. Let's look at this starting hand. We do have cards that we can play on curve in the 2-cost Shiroshi, the 4-cost Frankie, and the 6-cost Kingdom Come. However, these cards are not going to help us win the game. The 4-cost Frankie's power comes from him having 2000 counter, and the 6-cost Kingdom Come is only helpful later on. In fact, this card was so helpful later on that this card is actually banned in the current format. Still, despite us being able to play on curve, these are not the cards that we want to be seeing right now, and as such we would likely mulligan this hand to look for some more options that'll help us bridge into the late game and actually help us win the game. Even if you're unsure what sorts of key cards exist for the certain matchup, there are certain key cards that are generally good into certain deck archetypes. For a control deck like Enel against a very aggressive deck like Red Rayleigh, cards like Nami, like Gedatsu, and like the 9-cost Yamato can be very powerful and influential in their ability to win the game thanks to their ability to play a character while also being able to clear one of the opponent's characters at the same time. Many people fall into the trap of playing the same way into different matchups, but the way that these different decks interact are vastly different, so the way that you must play out your game can also be very different as well. Sometimes you do want to find these cards like 7-cost Mom to really push forward your agenda, and sometimes you really want to find cards like the 9-cost Yamato to slow down the game. There are also some very unique decks in the game that force you to approach the game completely differently, like Black Teach and Blue Nami. And some of these matchups are quite difficult. Sometimes You need a little bit more than a lucky starting hand to win these matchups. Next, let's talk about Mulligan Sets. Sometimes when you read a guide or you watch a deck profile video, they'll talk about what cards they're looking for in the mulligan. And while these cards are very good, what happens when you're told to look for 2 to 3 cards in your starting hand, but you only see one of them? Sometimes seeing one or even 2 good cards in your starting hand isn't enough if they don't work together in tandem. For example, if the 2 cards have the same cost and therefore would come out at the same timing, then perhaps you wouldn't actually find the timing to play the second card. Another reason may be that they are key cards for different game plans and therefore won't work together. Conversely, some cards are only worth keeping if you find a set of 2 cards in your starting hand. Talking about a deck which at the point of recording this video is considered to be one of the best in the game right now, Blue-Purple Luffy. Blue-Purple Luffy plays this card called Godthread. Godthread is a card that can KO one of the opponent's characters that costs 5 or less and gives you 1 Dong active. If you were to play this on curve on your 5 Dong turn when you're going first, that means the next turn you're going to have 8 Dong. So if you have an 8 cost character in your starting hand as well as one of these ramp cards in the early game, this is a very good mulligan set. However, before what would be your 7 Dong turn, you have 2 turns. So if you have 2 ramp cards and a 9 cost, this is also a very good mulligan set as the ramp cards will help you reach the 9 cost turn earlier and very consistently. These combinations of cards that you want to find in your starting hand, whether it's 1 ramp and an 8 cost, or 2 ramp cards and a 9 cost, are very good templates. But if you only see 1 ramp and a 9 cost, these things simply don't work together at all. As such, in these situations, you need to make sure that you're not only looking for good cards, even cards that you really want to see in your starting hand, but you have to make sure that they work well together. Now, what if there's only 1 card that you're looking for in your starting hand? What are the odds of you actually finding a card, assuming that you run it at 4 copies in a 50-card deck? I'm not going to pretend that I'm some sort of mathematician. I use a hypergeometric calculator online. The hypergeometric distribution, when applied to trading card games, allows you to calculate the odds of you finding a certain card within a certain number of draws. This means that for your starting hand, you would want to calculate the odds of not finding that card in your first 5 draws. The odds of not finding one of these 4 cards in your starting hand is 64.7%. That means that there's a 35.3% chance that you do find this card, which is honestly a bit higher than you may have expected. If you were to also consider the mulligan as you get 1 chance to fully refresh your hand, then the odds of you finding this single card in your deck is 58.2%. For a card that only occupies 4 out of 50 cards in your deck, this is a pretty high number. This means that in certain matchups where 1 single card will make or break the matchup, I highly encourage you to actually just go and look for that card. If the matchup's going to be lost if you don't find it anyways, then why not take that chance? A little bit off topic, but you can also use the hypergeometric distribution to find things like the chance of your searcher hitting a valid target. One of the final things to look over, which many people often forget even after playing the game for a long time, is how much counter is in your starting hand. Though this is one of the final priorities in your starting hand, it is still something to consider. If you do have the perfect starting hand, a lot of the time that means that you have a lot of cards without counter. And if you're fighting a deck that's going to be pushing you over very early on, without having a couple of cards with counter in the early game, you're going to be going down to 1 or 2 life very, very quickly, meaning that you may not even get to the point to play the cards that you held onto your hand for. As such, having a good balance of cards that you want to play on curve, your key cards, as well as counter is optimal, but not always something that you can find. This balance is something that you'll slowly get a feeling for, but know that it exists so that you can start to look out for in your games. The 3 main questions that I ask myself when I start a game is, what cards do I want to find in this matchup? How's my curve looking? And how's my counter? Based on these, I'll give a sort of feeling-based score out of 10 on my starting hand. If I were to rate a starting hand something like 7 out of 10, it means that it's playable, but there's a lot to be desired. There are some timings where you keep these 7 out of 10 hands, and sometimes that you mulligan them. So what are these timings? Well, I think that it largely comes down to the difficulty of the matchup and if the opponent mulligans their hand sometimes. By the rules, the player going first is technically supposed to choose if they want to mulligan their hand or not first. This means that the player going second has the added information of knowing whether or not the opponent liked or didn't like their starting hand. If the opponent liked their hand, that means that you're going to have to need a strong hand to combat that. This means that if you did have one of these 7 out of 10 hands, you may want to mulligan it to try to find like an 8 or a 9 out of 10. If your opponent mulligans their hand, then maybe you do keep this hand because it's playable, and if the opponent just doesn't get a good starting hand again, maybe you'll be able to win through the cards that you find. Another factor that you need to take into account in this phase is how difficult the matchup is. If it's a matchup that you're generally supposed to win 60+% of the time, you don't need to get greedy and look for the best hand. You just need to make sure that you find a good enough hand that gets you to the point that you can win the game. Conversely, if you're fighting a matchup that you're about 40% winning or 60% losing against, then these 7 out of 10 hands are just not going to cut it. And a lot of the times, you just need to find that perfect hand to make sure that you find an edge in the matchup. Knowing what to keep and mulligan will largely come down to practice, but you don't need to practice just once per game. I often like to train my mulligan by just imagining scenarios. I'll imagine a matchup in my head, whether I'm going first or second against X, and keep looking at the top 5 cards in my physical deck to decide if I would want to keep or mulligan that hand. Just looking at 5 cards over and over again and imagining the scenarios in which you can play out the game through that hand will give you a little bit of information and make you feel more comfortable with the deck in general. Especially if I'm building a deck concept from scratch, I like to do this a lot to make sure that I'm not having too many bad starting hands. If I have too many starting hands that I feel like I would want to mulligan, that's generally an issue with deck building and something that you would want to look back at the drawing board for. I hope that you guys enjoyed this very quick fundamental course on the mulligan. The mulligan phase is a very important part of the game, and I hope that through this video you were able to learn something. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, share it with someone who you maybe want to get into the card game, and I'll see you guys next time. I hope you're having a great day. Bye-bye.